Welcome, everyone, to the third Thursday meetup of the West Orlando WordPress Meetup Group. I'm Rob Watson, a co-organizer and host, and West Orlando WordPress is an official WordPress meetup group and is affiliated with the main WordPress Orlando and WordCamp US meetup groups. Tonight's presentation is a detective's guide to troubleshooting WordPress. Troubleshooting WordPress can be a daunting task. It's hard to know where to start or where you're even looking for when something goes wrong, especially if you don't know a plugin from a theme or anything in between. Put to rest your doubts and fears about troubleshooting your own WordPress website. With just a bit of confidence, logic, and methodical sleuthing, plus a healthy dose of Google, anyone can become the master of their own website domain and track down the culprit. Our presenter tonight is Micah Wood. Micah is a WordPress developer at Bluehost. A professional WordPress developer for over a decade, Micah has worked on sites for Fortune 100 companies, has released over a dozen WordPress plugins, is a frequent speaker at WordCamps, co-organizes the WordPress Gwinnett meetup, is a co-host on the WP Square One podcast, and shares his knowledge by teaching at SkillShare and blogging on WordPress development topics. During the presentation and using the chat feature or the Q&A feature at the top right of the screen, feel free to type questions you have, and I will queue them up for Micah to answer after he's done. After the presentation, feel free to pose your questions in person as well. At this point, I'd like to invite everyone to mute their microphones for the presentation. And Micah, thank you for being our presenter this evening. The time is now yours.
So I wanted to start out just by pointing out that the presentation that I'm about to go through, there's also kind of a written version. I help contribute to the Bluehost Blueprint books. There's one called the Web Pros Guide. So if you want kind of a written run through, we have this troubleshooting bit here. You will get some visuals tonight in the presentation that are not in there. But if you are interested in learning other things about, how to work with sites or just even basic getting started with WordPress, or basics at blogging, these are some great so for you to take a look at. But I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. So my name's Micah. Work at Bluehost. I've been working with Bluehost for 2.5-ish, coming up on 3 years maybe. So I get to do a lot of interesting things. But if you wanted to follow me on my blog or on Twitter, those are both listed here. WP Scholar is the handle I go by pretty much everywhere. So if you want to look me up on Twitter, it's WP Scholar, website, WP Scholar, and pretty much any other thing that I'm on. Tonight's topic, we're just going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting in WordPress. So it's one of those things where, when you're first starting with WordPress, or whether you've been running a site for a long time, it can be a bit involved. So you're going to get a professional developer's distilled guide for users on how to logically approach and think through the problems. And I think you'll find some of this very, very helpful. So the basic thing that we're kind of starting out with here is when you have a problem, you usually have one of two things, right? So you have something that happened that you weren't expecting to happen, or something that you were expecting to happen that didn't happen at all. And most problems fall into one of those two buckets. So kind of a quick run through on the general, 20,000-foot view of troubleshooting. It's kind of 3 steps, right? So you have your basic documentation step. What are the symptoms that I'm running into? What am I seeing that I don't want to see? What am I not seeing that I do want to see? And then we have the diagnosis, which is obviously what is it that is causing this issue? And one of the things we have to be careful of, obviously, is not to diagnose things that we want to make sure we get to the root cause. So we don't want to diagnose something and just assume we're right when potentially it could be something else causing the issue. Then we want to take a look at the course of action. How can we handle, the problem that we're running into? So that's kind of our general roadmap for this presentation. We're going to kind of get into each of these sections and walk through, from a very pragmatic point of view, what are the things that we can do to do these things efficiently and effectively, but also, are there any tools that we need to have in place in advance so that there aren't any holes in our ability to work through any of these steps. So first thing, we want to obviously document the issue that we're having. Now, I say obviously, but a lot of people don't actually document their issue. They just say, I have a problem, and but they don't go through some steps to kind of think through and maybe consider that maybe what they think is going on is not what they think is going on. So they kind of jump to the diagnosis step without necessarily documenting and being like, okay, this is what I have, this is what's happening, this is what's not happening. So there's some essential details that you want to make sure that you take into account whenever you're looking at a problem. And it never hurts to write these down, especially given the process that I'm going to give to you tonight. The more that you have written down, even if it's just jotted in a notebook, then the easier it will be to diagnose your problem. So first thing we want to do is make sure that we know what steps it takes to reproduce the problem. A lot of times people will be like, oh, well, I just do these 15 steps and, there's the problem. One of the things you kind of have to do when you're documenting the problem is reduce the number of steps to reproduce it as much as you possibly can. So if you can do two things and get that same problem to happen, then we know it's more likely that one of those two things could be related to why it's breaking, right? Whereas if we have 15 steps, then that's not very helpful, especially if somebody has to install 13 plugins and do all this stuff to get to the same point. So if you need to get help from somebody else, you want to reduce that as much as you can. And then we want to document what actually happened, right? So you want to make sure that you list out, these are the steps I did, and when I did this step, this is what happened. And also want to document what you expected to happen, because that is typically, as we said before, whenever you run into a problem, it's the difference between what you expected and what actually happened that is the problem. So I have kind of like a little mnemonic device that I like to use for this. So I don't know if you've ever heard of, well, I took Latin in school. So the Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. We have kind of the troubleshooter's guide version of that, which is I did, I saw, I expected. So if you can kind of remember these three things, this is what I did to produce the problem, this is what I saw, and this is what I expected. It's kind of a good, easy way to remember, like when you're trying to piece together the essential details, especially if you need to share it with somebody else. It's a good way to do it. So then outside of kind of the essential details, right, we have the contextual details. There's a lot of other things, little key pieces of information that could give us very big hints as to kind of what's going on. So one of the big ones here is workarounds. So there's almost always some way that you can get around the problem, whether that, who knows what that, it just depends on your problem, right? But you don't know until you kind of play around with it. So part of reducing the number of steps that it takes to cause the problem also helps you identify some of those workarounds. So playing around with just trying to break it in different ways can help you find out some of these things. You also want to make a note of when the problem occurred. A lot of people don't think about this, but if it happened yesterday at 5 p.m. versus it was like 3 weeks ago, but no one did anything about it at the time. These are all bits and pieces of information that could help you out. Recent changes. So obviously, if you've made a change on the site, it's possible that that change could have caused something. So you want to make a note of those things. You want to make a note of like what version of WordPress you're running. Maybe if your web host has different versions of software running or something. You want to make notes of that. So having all that information is very, very helpful. And just kind of understanding the environment, right? There's some more advanced things that you may not be aware of, but if you can get some of this environment information, if you do end up getting help from somebody else, that information can come in very handy. And I'll show you in a bit how you can very quickly and kind of automatically grab a lot of this information. So even if you don't know what it all means, you can get that information should you ever need someone else to help. And then, of course, any error messages. It's very common that someone will say, well, I have this problem and this is what happened, and they'll forget to mention the exact error message. So it's always good to, if you see something like that, get a screenshot or at least copy and paste it so that you have that for reference. Sometimes error messages only show up, once every 10 times you load a page. So you may not see it again, but it may be an ongoing problem. And a lot of times those intermittent problems can be very difficult. So when you see an error message, grab a snapshot and keep it handy. And so again, screen captures are very helpful, especially if you have to communicate your problem to somebody else. They can see the issue. And even if you can get a video as well, that's a good way to do it. So we're going to show you a few things that you need to be aware of so you can kind of automatically grab the information that you need to kind of help you start this documentation process. So first thing, I think is not too long ago, WordPress added a feature called Site Health. And it's under the Tools menu, which is not an area where a lot of people actually look. It used to not have much of anything in there, except for like import, export. But we've added some stuff there for personal data, and Site Health is a very, very valuable tool. When you first load it up, you'll see kind of the screen you see here on the right-hand side, and it'll list out any issues that your site might have. One thing to note is that it could be one of these critical issues or recommended improvements that could be impacting your problem. So if you do see critical issues, it's probably best to try to address them. Each of those boxes there will expand out and give you more details on the problem and potential ways you can fix it. And often we'll have some sort of link to documentation for that problem. So from that standpoint, very helpful. The top of that screen, if you click on the info section, it'll actually give you a button you can click, and it'll copy all of the information about your website, everything from the environment and software versions and plugins and everything that's running. It'll grab all of that stuff for you and give it to you so you can paste it in a document or paste it in a help ticket or whatever you need to do with that. So that's a very, very helpful, very powerful tool, and very glad to see that in WordPress. Another thing that you want to consider is probably installing a plugin. If not this plugin, another plugin similar to it. There are a handful of other plugins that do things like this, but this plugin is called Stream. And all it really does is kind of tracks the different types of activities that commonly happen on a site. So somebody logs in, somebody logs out, somebody updated a post, somebody deleted a plugin, somebody installed a plugin, somebody switched themes. All of those things are recorded. And the valuable part of this is, again, if you know general time frame of when your problem occurred, you can take this log of all the things that happened within that time frame, and you can look at it and say, okay, well, were there any new plugins that we put in? Did somebody edit this particular page or content where we're seeing the problem? So all those different kinds of things can really be helpful. And just to give you an example, it wasn't that long ago at a website, and somebody reached out to me and they're like, we just had 100 posts from our, 100 pages from our website vanish, and we don't know where they went, and we need your help, which is obviously not ideal. It turns out that what had happened was somebody deleted a particular user who had authored all of those pages and didn't select the option to attribute those to somebody else, but rather to delete those pages. And they didn't know what they were doing at the time. But this plugin Stream allowed me to say, oh, okay, someone deleted this user. And then I'm like, wait, well, that's the person who created the old version of the website. And so now we can look and say, oh, okay, this is what's happened. We just need to go to a backup, grab all those, re-import them, assign them to somebody else so that doesn't happen again. So this is a very helpful tool, and I would recommend that you have something like this on all your sites. It's not on WordPress by default, so it is something you will have to install, and it will not help you if you install it after the fact. So kind of jumping into the real meat of this is, how do we diagnose an issue? So we've collected all this information. What do we do with it? First thing, just kind of a word of caution. If you are going to be doing any troubleshooting, some of these troubleshooting steps that we may do could potentially break things. So the best thing to do when you're troubleshooting is to make sure that you do a backup before. That way you don't mess anything up any more than it already is. Or if you have a staging site available, highly recommend that you take the latest everything from the live site, put it on your staging site, and then that way you can safely do all your debugging without actually affecting anything on the live site or breaking. If something goes wrong, you can always just pull back down from production and kind of pick back up on your troubleshooting. So always a good idea. There's a lot of these steps that you can do without hurting anything, but there are a few that are kind of destructive if you're not careful. Even simple things like switching a theme. I've had it backfire on me where I've had like 30 pages lose 50 widgets on each one, and I had to go back into the cached version that Google has to see what ones were on which pages and like recreate it all by hand. So it's always possible. It doesn't take long to click a button and break something, and then next thing you know, you're going to spend the rest of your day fixing it. So definitely do this. So this is the visual that I haven't seen anything like this anywhere else, but it's something that I think definitely helps narrow things down. And this is kind of, if you will, my secret to diagnosing issues. So I don't know if you've ever played the game Clue. I think I've pretty much made all the people I've ever played Clue with very angry, and they don't play with me anymore. It was really more just because I draw an extended graph and I mark way more information down than the average person, and so I can solve who done it with what and where way faster than everybody else. And so I've kind of applied that same strategy here to WordPress, right? If we can have a logical, systematic way of digging in and trying to, exclude the things that don't apply, that way we can narrow in on the things that are most likely the problem, right? So the idea here is that, you'll take your source and your type, and you'll kind of figure out which things don't apply, and then kind of, from there you can say, well, given what's happening and the things we've eliminated, this is likely the issue. So in this case, we're saying, okay, well, we've kind of ruled out the possibility of this being a plugin problem, right? So we can X all those things out. Then we look at the types of issues and we say, oh, well, this isn't a security issue at all. So we can rule all that stuff out. And then, maybe at that point we have enough to figure out the problem. Maybe we have to eliminate other things first, but the idea obviously being that by process of elimination and just a little mental help of these buckets, you can get down to what's going on for sure. So talking about the types of issues first, we have visual issues. These are basically when something looks out of place. So like you go to a website, instead of the sidebar being on this side and the content over here, you have the content in a big empty spot, and then the sidebar is way at the bottom, right? So that's kind of a layout issue. Doesn't look right. Something, you know, from the layout or just the general style, the look and feel of the page is off. So that's a visual issue. So if you're seeing something like that, then we're going to kind of lean heavily on that visual issue type. So then we have interactive. So interactive means that you're not loading up another page, but when you're within the context of a single page, you know, something is not interacting in the way that you would expect. So the button can't be clicked, or the pop-up can't be dismissed, or things like that. So, you know, or I can't, you know, when I hit the save button for my post, nothing happens, right? So these are all interactivity issues. And in most cases, it's gonna be that whatever interaction isn't happening, but in some cases it could just be really weird interactions. Like I click this thing and then like 14 things happen that are kind of weird and unrelated. All of these are interactive issues. So, and then we would take a look here at functional issues. So functional issues are basically when you first load up a page, or it could be something that affects the entire site, or it could be isolated to a particular page or even part of a page. So one of the things that I'll often look for to see if we have a functional issue is if I load up a page, for example, I'll look to see if the footer is loading, right? So like a lot of times, you know, sometimes you might think it is a visual issue, but a lot of times the fact that the footer is not loading is a clear indicator that something went wrong during the processing and output of the page originally. And so because of that, it's more of a functional issue. Something in the code went wrong when we were trying to load up the page. So then we have data issues. Data issues are can be a little tricky. Sometimes they have a tendency to look like other problems. But they're also a lot easier in most cases to fix. So, you know, you might have a particular page or a whole section of a website or a particular content type across the site that's affected. And sometimes that is a data issue. So if, for example, you change a setting somewhere in a theme or in WordPress or somewhere else, it could affect a lot of different pieces of content that show up on the site. So being aware of the fact that most of the time data issues, they have a pattern, but you have to know to look for it. So in other words, you know, oh, this affects all of my testimonials, or, you know, oh, this is only happening on this page, but it's always happening no matter what browser we load it in. These are all things that would indicate that we have some sort of data issue. And then we have security. For most people, the fact that there is a security issue means it should be pretty obvious. Something, you know, somebody changed your homepage to, you know, some, you know, advertise for some terrorist organization, which has happened to me. Or, you know, any other signs of tampering where somebody's done something, you know, it's usually pretty obvious. Any inobvious security issues usually aren't considered issues because people don't realize they're happening. Although on the security endpoint, I've had someone's site that would load perfectly fine, but all of their SEO results basically had titles referring to drugs that you could buy. And so it isn't always necessarily directly affecting the performance or functionality of your site. It can also show up as a side effect as well. So then we have performance issues. So performance issues are basically when something loads slowly. It could be that the page itself loads slowly, or it could also be that something like an interaction on the page is very sluggish. So these are all different types of performance issues. In most cases, you're just looking at, the web page was loading really slow, and so the user can't interact or click on the page or something like that, or it's impacting our search performance. There's a lot of different things that come into play with that. And so the environmental issues, unless you know what you're doing, basically, if you've ruled out all of the other types of issues, chances are you've got an environmental issue. So for example, one of the problems that I've run into in the past is I had a site. It was running fine. It was doing great. It was being maintained, but no one had actually touched the site in 3 months, right? So no one had gone into WordPress. No one had done anything, but all of a sudden the whole website is just white screen. And so went in and started looking around, and just process of elimination. Obviously, I'm a developer, so I went into the code and started trying to figure out what was going on. But before I did that, the first question I asked, I was like, well, who's this hosted with, right? And then I called up the web host and was like, okay, have you guys made any updates or changes lately? Oh, no. And so sure enough, I was like, okay, well, I'll go see what's going on. Maybe somebody did something and they're just not fessing up to it. Sure enough, I get into it and I realize that I literally switched 2 characters in the code, and then the whole website comes back up. And it turns out, I called the web host right after that. I was like, did you guys update your PCRE regex library, which, that's a relatively complex thing, but then they fessed up to it. Oh yeah, we did that within the last 48 hours. And so that was the one thing that broke the entire site. So we couldn't blame it on anything else. And so that was why I was like, okay, so it's got to be an environmental issue, something with the web host. Maybe they changed something. And even though they didn't fess up to it right away, it was actually the problem. So environmental issues are often kind of the, you've ruled out everything else. Doesn't make any sense otherwise. So then we have the sources, right? So we've gone through the types. These are the general buckets of types of problems and kind of how to identify whether you're dealing with that type of issue. And there can be some vagueness. Again, this is not like a perfect science. There's a little bit of art to it. So now we're jumping into the sources. So this is the other vertical portion of that matrix that we were looking at earlier. So we're going to start with, I'm sorry, actually, technically, this is the other side. But yeah, so these are plugins. So in WordPress, you have plugins, you have themes. Plugins provide the functionality, additional functionality that you might need to get your site to do what you want it to do. And so in order to figure out whether or not something is a plugin problem, you want to make sure that you rule those things out. So typically what you'll do is you'll deactivate all the plugins. Now, in some cases, the functionality that isn't working, if you disable a certain plugin, it could turn that off. So it may be that you say, okay, well, I'll leave this plugin on and turn everything else off and see if that breaks it or fixes it or whatever. Usually when you turn all the plugins off, if it's a plugin problem, the problem goes away. And then you can turn the plugins on one at a time until that issue pops back up. And usually the last thing that you activated before that issue came back is the problem. So that way you can identify that particular plugin as being the problem. Now, in some cases, in rare cases, I've found that it's actually a combination of 2 plugins not working together. So even if you identify one as the problem, be a little open-minded that it could be that one and this other one that happen to be running at the same time that causes the issue. So if you reach out, for example, to a plugin developer and you're like, hey, I've got this problem. It appears to be due to your plugin. And they're like, I hear you, but that doesn't happen when I'm just running my plugin. So it never hurts to kind of go back and say, okay, well, let's turn this plugin on and everything else off and see if the problem's still there. And if it does go away, then you reactivate whatever you had. And then whichever one causes that problem, it's usually those combination of two. But this can be a little bit of a complicated process. So there's this really cool plugin that you can install called Plugin Detective. And it basically does all the hard work for you to make sure that you are, not blaming something that it isn't causing the problem. So Plugin Detective will actually walk you through step by step, allow you in the browser to navigate to a page, and then will automatically turn on and off plugins for you, but it'll do it in a separate environment that doesn't affect your live site. So in other words, if somebody goes to your site and you've turned off all your plugins, normally your site might look very different or function very differently than it should. Plugin Detective kind of does that in a safe zone where you can run through that without necessarily affecting the rest of your site. And then, so we also want to look at themes, right? So I'm kind of going through this list in the order that they're most likely to be the problem. So plugins are very often the cause of problems. You get one poorly coded plugin or two plugins that are trying to do the same thing and kind of step on each other. But then the next most common thing is the theme, right? So there's lots of themes out there, free ones you can install, really bad ones that could introduce malware that if you just download them off of, some random website. So there's all kinds of things that could crop up from that. So the easy way to test that is to switch your theme and see if the problem still exists. If the problem goes away, then you switch back and it comes back, then obviously you have a theme problem. So that one should be relatively straightforward since you only have one theme. So now we're getting into some of the less common things. So caching. So caching is basically, it's a big word for, your website does a lot of work to kind of pull data from the database and, take all the bits and pieces of code and plugins and mash it all together to generate the final page. And caching is just a big word for, it's a shortcut, right? We can say we've done all this work. If we just store the end result somewhere, next time someone comes and asks for the same thing, we give them that instead. We save ourselves a lot of work. But at the same time, that can cause issues. So if you, to rule out a caching problem, what you want to do is test in a new browser or on a new device. Because what happens, for example, if you visit a particular page, that page could get cached in WordPress. It could get cached in some third-party service, or pieces of the page, like images, could get cached in the browser. So there's kind of a lot of different ways and places that can happen. So by switching browsers, you're able to say, okay, well, if this browser that I was just in cached it, when I go to this browser that I haven't used, it isn't cached. And if it looks different than the one that we just looked at, then it's probably a caching issue. And again, doing the same thing, try it on a different device. Or does it happen on a mobile phone as opposed to a laptop? Or another very common one, perhaps even more common than switching devices, or helpful hint on that previous, opening up a Chrome incognito window is a very easy way to check to see if you've got some sort of caching issue. Incognito windows, they don't store cookies and they clear the cache out when you close it down. So if you close it down and open up a new one and things look different, then it could be a caching issue. But yeah, logging in and out of WordPress is also a very big common thing that you should do when looking for caching problems, because a lot of times most caching plugins, when you're logged in, they don't give you the cached result. But if you're logged out, they will. And so if you're seeing something different when you're logged in as opposed to when you're logged out, it's very likely that you're dealing with a caching problem. And so then data, well, a type of issue can also be a potential source of issue. It's kind of a combination there. So in this case, what you want to do is try to see if you can correlate that data with a particular setting or data entity. So for example, in WordPress, we have posts and we have pages. These are all different data entities. So if it only affects posts, or it only affects pages, or you've got a plugin that adds events and it only affects events, while you might be thinking, oh, it's the event plugin that's causing the problem, it could just be that there's some setting in the events plugin that's causing a data issue, and simply updating that setting could fix your problem. And so you want to try to narrow down, what is it affecting, what settings kind of affect that, or what, is it specific to a given page? Do I, go in and inspect the content for that page? So you want to try to eliminate in that way. And so one other thing that you can do is also removing the data altogether. So in other words, there's issues on websites where, weird characters will show up in the page's content, sort of like a little box with a question mark on it or something. And so that typically is a data problem. But sometimes, you can't get the character in there that you want unless you remove the character and then kind of, get it correct in maybe Microsoft Word or something, and then paste it back in and see if it goes away. And then we have third-party integrations. So this is where, maybe you're using something like a plugin that integrates with Twitter, right? So again, you might be tempted to blame the plugin itself, but it's very possible that Twitter itself is down temporarily, and so therefore the plugin doesn't work because it's trying to communicate with Twitter. Could be, any number of that type of thing. So if you see something like that, and it is related to some third-party thing, don't immediately blame the plugin, but also just do a quick check. Look up the companies. Most companies have a page online where it lists the status of all their services. Our API is down, our, people can't log in, or whatever is going on. So you can look that up. And if they don't have one, you can always call them too and be like, hey, are you having problems? So always do a check on that if it's dealing with something kind of external. So then we have the server. The server is basically the computer in the cloud that is running your website. And so what we have to look for is to see if we can, again, this is kind of like the environmental thing. If you can't attribute it to another source, the issue happens in the absence of code or data changes. So those are, kind of like example I gave earlier, something changed at the web hosting level, it broke the whole site. So, that's one of those things where you have to call. And then lastly, the least common cause of issues is WordPress. That is not to say that WordPress doesn't have any issues, but most likely because it's thoroughly tested by millions of people, most of the big issues get fixed. There could be some, small issues here and there that often will crop up. But so if you're suspecting that it's WordPress, the best thing to do is just to get a clean WordPress install with no other things there, and test to see if the problem persists. Now, obviously, if it, if you disable a plugin and the thing that you thought was a problem disappeared, then it's not WordPress. It's related to whatever plugin. But so yeah, so that's kind of your last check there, is to see if maybe it is actually a WordPress problem. So at this point, we've taken our matrix. We said, okay, this is the type of issue that we most likely have. We've got the source of the issue that is most likely. We kind of find the intersection of those, and so we've hopefully properly identified the problem. So now we need to figure out, obviously, what to do about it. So anytime you're working with a plugin problem, the best thing to do is to first just reach out to the plugin author, or you can consider using some other alternative plugin. There's been cases where I still remember working on my very first WordPress website, and there were not so many plugins as there are now. And so at the time, WordPress had just introduced custom post types, and some developer had just built the first, events plugin for WordPress. And so I needed one, so I used it. Problem was that I had 2,000 plus events on this particular site, and it crashed the page because the author didn't implement pagination. So I reached out and was like, hey, this pagination is not something that you built into your plugin. Is that something you can do? And then, sure enough, most plugin authors are going to respond back and be very helpful if they realize that, oh, there's a problem with my code. So not always, but most of the time. And so there's now so many other plugins that finding an alternative plugin is maybe not ideal, but definitely an option. So the other thing is when we have a theme issue, same kind of thing, reach out to the theme author or use a different theme. Again, very similar approach. So for caching issues, first thing you want to do is flush the cache, and see if that fixes the issue. Now, most people assume that they only have one type of caching going on. A lot of times your web host has caching, and so you have to go through your web host interface, or maybe they have some sort of thing they've added in WordPress where you can flush that. Sometimes you have a caching plugin that you've installed, and so there's some sort of setting in the plugin that you have to work with to flush it. Sometimes things get cached in the browser and not even on the WordPress side, so you have to flush the cache in your browser. So being aware of all the places, if you're using Cloudflare, it can have its own caching, so you may need to flush the cache there. So doing that just to verify, okay, yeah, this is going to fix the problem. It's some sort of caching issue. When I flush the cache, that problem goes away. Usually that's a sign that there's some sort of configuration issue with your caching. So a lot of times I'll see people running two different caching plugins, or maybe, their web host has caching and they installed a plugin and they're not getting along together. Or you've got a super advanced caching plugin with so many options that you don't know what to do with it. And really it's just, I shouldn't be caching my e-commerce checkout pages, because by doing so, I'm exposing information about other people's purchases to whoever comes next. So things like that, that you just want to look at. But most of the time, it's conflicting plugins or even web hosting / plugins. Or some sort of configuration issue. So if you don't know how to configure all of that, you can find somebody who does. Or there's really great plugins out there like WP Rocket, and they have support, and so you can actually call and get support on that kind of thing. So then we have data. So our data, basically, all I can say is correct it. At this point, hopefully you've figured out what it is. And so you should be, in the process of your testing it to identify that indeed it is a data issue. You should at that point know what to do. Third-party integration. So again, if it's a service that's gone down, you want to wait until it comes back up. Or again, you can also use an alternative service. If you realize your favorite social network is, going away for some reason, you may need to switch. And then, of course, with this server, that's all your web host, right? So you want to, they all have support unless you're hosting stuff on your own. So you should have a number to call, somebody to talk to. And, most of the time you'll get somebody helpful who will be able to help figure out your problem. But if you don't, you hang up, call back. So then we want to take a look at what to do if we do actually have a WordPress problem. So in the rare case that you do, WordPress has a system for reporting bugs. So if you go and you Google report a bug in WordPress, there'll be a page that'll pull up, and it'll basically give you the step-by-step on how to go about reporting the bug. And usually the first thing you want to do is check and make sure somebody else hasn't reported it, right? We don't want to have 4 million people reporting the same bug. Ideally just having one ticket for that is important. So it's good to kind of look that up and just follow the steps. But generally, if it's something big, those things get fixed relatively quickly. So that is kind of the general run through. So I'm going to kind of jump into questions, but as I do that, I'm going to go ahead and quick scroll back to our matrix, because that's where most people have questions about or want to see it and get a screenshot or something. So a lot of slides. There we go. Yeah.
Thank you, Micah. This is super, super helpful for a lot of us who are dealing with these kinds of things. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point, and then we'll go right into the question and answers.